Joining me on the call today, I've got Tim Kelly. Welcome to the call, Tim.
Thanks for having me, David.
Tell us a bit about you and the organisation that you're a part of.
Yeah, so my name's Tim Kelly. I'm an aeronautical engineer by trade. I spent most of my career in the US and Europe working on big civil and military programs, and moved back to the sunny coast in mid 2016 and worked for a local aerospace company up here before starting the Manufacturing Excellence Forum in March of 2021. It was, and the MEF is it's a not-for-profit industry group, and it's really focused on creating more made in Australia, more sovereign capability, in particular in and around the Sunshine Coast, where we're trying to really build an advanced manufacturing cluster.
Yeah, fantastic. Because really, I suppose there's been a big push to, the wages going up in Australia and the cost of manufacture going up, that things are moving offshore. Tell me about what impact you've seen from the changes in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the changes more recently in terms of strength of the Australian dollar, I mean, obviously it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but it does really punish importing and reward and incentivize exporting, which is fantastic. And I think that over the longer term, when I say it's fantastic in terms of incentivizing more sovereign manufacturing, which is obviously what we're about. Yep. There are, of course, a whole bunch of other things that make it difficult that come along with that particular change, but that's one of the things that we've seen, and through talking with the manufacturers that we speak with who are exporting, they're having a great time with that at the moment, especially if the inputs to their processes are not also imported. That obviously doesn't cover everybody, though. If you look at a lot of the priority areas coming out of, in particular, federal and state government, they're pretty heavily focused and will be focused around more of the value-adding type industries, in particular in mining and agriculture.
Yeah.
Most of our gross domestic product is made up of mining, agriculture, and tourism. Mm-hmm. As a result, we don't rank very well internationally in terms of the composition of our GDP and where it comes from. It's all pretty low complexity stuff.
Yeah.
That is more like it's more commodity based. We need to really be transitioning away from that. So I think, the notion of prioritizing those value add areas, and in addition, defense and clean tech and med tech and enabling technologies and robotics, I think that's a really good thing to be doing as far as that's concerned. So, certainly still plenty of headwinds around labor, cost of housing, cost of living, cost of land, even industrial land, availability of industrial land. But some good tailwinds there as well in terms of societal and government support, particularly with what's been going on geopolitically. There is more of a push to be doing more sovereign manufacturing. So it does feel like we're very slowly trying to, turning the tide there. And we are pushing back into more made in Australia, which is great.
Yeah, because I think we got to a stage where, when the automotive industry decided to pull the pin on Australia and go offshore, it was like, okay, that's a big chunk.
It is, yeah.
Our industry that's sort of going out the door here. And, you're right. I think the majority of products that we sell are all of these sort of commoditized products that we're digging holes in the ground and sending all our iron ore offshore. This whole idea of rebuilding the value add or the manufacturing component, or getting back to being the clever country.
Right.
What should people be considering to become world-class again in what we do in Australia?
So I think there's probably two aspects to that. One of them is innovation in product development. And I think that whilst we tend to be quite an innovative country in terms of some of the things we've brought through, like Wi-Fi or the black box, or this is really world-changing stuff, which is fantastic. Our record of commercialization of IP on an international scale is not very good. So I think that there's a fair bit of work that we need to do there. Then there is, being world-class from an operating perspective. And, we do have a lot of organizations that are in that small to medium space, and sometimes even, getting towards micro. And the investment involved in even just digitizing their systems, their business systems, let alone their manufacturing systems, can sometimes be overwhelming, and they'll put it into the too hard basket. I think there's a fair bit that needs to happen and to change culturally there in terms of increasing the adoption, because it's so difficult to adopt a lot of the more advanced technologies where you start really getting those big benefits from a productivity perspective without having a good digital foundation.
Can you give me some examples of where you're seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot of information and sessions coming from a bunch of different places, whether it's from federal government, state government, local government, industry groups like ourselves, which is about advanced manufacturing and Industry 4.0, and it feels like in a lot of ways some businesses have been turned off, manufacturing businesses in particular, of course, have been turned off by it because it just seemed like it was all hype, but no one really knew what to do with it. But I think that that's changing and is becoming clearer, and the pathways to do it are becoming easier and more cost effective. Yeah, so I think that on the whole, there's a fair bit of really good activity in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose the reason that we're going to be running this event is to really get some insight into what's happening on the ground.
Yeah,
because it's sort of one thing to hear it from a sort of an expert saying this is what you need to do, but it's probably more significant for people to know what's actually going on. So
correct.
what are people doing right now? Because I think you're right, there is a bit of a challenge, and COVID taught a lot of people one thing is when you're forced to innovate, you innovate.
Yeah, that's right. Look at what universities did. They went online in a couple of weeks, whereas they've been trying to go online for 3 years before that.
Yeah,
pressure drives innovation.
Yeah, and to me, like it's like that old tipping point, the Malcolm Gladwell story. Once enough people adopt something, then it'll just happen.
Yeah.
But until then, it's sort of there's a lot of resistance to change, and I think the same's happening in manufacturing right now. We're now on a global market, which means we have to be globally competitive, and it doesn't. It's not even about labor costs anymore. It's more about how do we innovate beyond the cost of labor.
Yep.
And how do we start using either IP, as you mentioned, or manufacturing process to become competitive again?
Correct. Yeah. I think one of the things we should look at is that how do we start getting to economies of scale in a lot of these businesses? Because we have a lot of small and micro businesses that are they're more fabrication than manufacturing. It's all generally pretty low volume. It's pretty bespoke. There's an awful lot of skill involved. And for a lot of businesses, a big part of the reason that they don't want to digitize, let alone automate, is because they don't see anything that they're doing as being repetitious enough to justify it. Look, some do, and there are some examples of it where there might be a fab shop that's doing a whole bunch of, I don't know, like stair brackets or something like that. And it's like, well, I'd love to automate that thing. And sometimes that even proves too hard, which is pretty disheartening. But then if you look at, where 80% of the volume of their work comes from, they're like, it's 2s and 3s and whatever. Yep. And most of the time they won't even do CAD for it. So that's really the question from me is how do we start helping these businesses move away from as much job shopping and into products at higher volumes? Because then the investment around digitization and automation becomes very easy. Yeah. And then productivity and margins and profits and everything go up.
Yeah. And I suppose there's two forces that help that as well. One is the trade barriers are breaking down, global trade barriers, which means it's easier to sell things globally than it was before.
Yep.
And I suppose with that comes the volume that you talked about, which all of a sudden makes it more sensical to digitize and scale. So you can become more specialized in one thing, but go to a broader, I say broader market, but I'm saying a bigger market.
It's much larger market. And, there's plenty of boats coming this way with full containers and plenty of boats going out again with pretty empty containers. So, and it's okay, I'm simplifying it. I don't mean to over trivialize it. The tyranny of distance around supply chain is certainly a challenge for local manufacturers providing into global markets, but it's not insurmountable. We're still running a trade deficit. So there's plenty that we can do.
Yeah, awesome. Look, I was going to keep this interview short, but it's getting long. The whole idea today was just to give people an insight as to what we're going to be covering at the presentation. What I'd love to hear more from you about on the day is some more specific case studies, maybe of individual manufacturers that have actually transitioned.
Yeah, sure.
Because we're really just trying to give people permission and understanding as to what the next direction or strategic direction needs to be for them to be able to scale and to become globally viable as businesses.
Fantastic.
Awesome, Tim. So thanks so much for your time today. Looking forward to catching up with you at the presentation, and hopefully we can get a whole lot of more insight and engagement. So thanks again.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David.